Good morning, students. I hope you have finished the text of the novel A House for Mr. Biswas that I shared with you. So, students, you must have seen that as the novel advances, we find a change in Mr. Biswas's attitude towards having a house. Students, earlier, the house was expected to lead to a discovery of his authentic selfhood and a proclamation of his identity. This time, owning a house comes out of the humiliation inflicted on his son and Mr. Biswas's helplessness to protect his family. Students, at that point, the house will be on a piece of land where he and his family can live with self-respect and dignity. Students, we see that his wife Sharma also agrees to leave the house, although she earlier advocated living with the Tulsi family. Mr. Biswas manages to get a loan from Ayodhya and buys a house in Port of Spain. He describes his house as such, I quote, "The sun came through the open window on the ground floor and struck the kitchen wall. Woodwork and frosted glass were hot to the touch. The inside brick wall was warm. The sun went through the home and laid dazzling strips on the exposed staircase." Unquote. Students, Naipaul uses words sun and dazzling in his description of the home, words that clearly reveal Mr. Biswas's happiness and sense of fulfillment. Later, Mr. Biswas discovers many flaws in the house, but the sense of satisfaction that he owns a house is there. To conclude, students, Naipaul seems to suggest that for displaced people like Mr. Biswas, owning a house is not just a matter of getting a shelter from heat, cold, or rain. In fact, it is both the imposition of order and a carving out of authentic selfhood within the heterogeneous and fragmented society of Trinidad. Students, the novel portrays Mr. Biswas as a man who stays put, struggling against the hostile environment instead of running away from it. Students, the theme of cultural disintegration receives a detailed treatment in The House of Mr. Biswas, a novel that describes 3 generations of East Indians. Naipaul's novel succeeds in transcending the individual self by universalizing the issue of alienation. Unlike Naipaul's earlier novels, this novel is not light-hearted because the hero is engaged in a serious battle against the forces of oppression. The novel even grows gloomier as Biswas's struggle with the Tulsis become more complex. Nevertheless, as it does not end on tragic note, this is not a novel of despair. Mr. Biswas succeeds in the end. He finally has a house of his own. The meaning of a house for Mr. Biswas is made richly clear in the prologue. I quote, "How terrible it would have been at this time to be without it, to have died among the Tulsis amid of the squalor of that large, disintegrating and indifferent family, to have left Sharma and the children among them in one room. Worse, to have lived without even attempting to lay claim to one's portion on the earth, to have lived and died as one had been born, unnecessary and unaccommodated." Unquote. Students, the choice of the protagonist's name in A House for Mr. Biswas is also interesting. The novelist seems to have carefully chosen this name. His aim is not only to depict the Hindu background but also to relate it to the circumstances in which he is living. For instance, the protagonist's first name is Mohan, which means, according to the novel, beloved, even though he is depicted as an individual who is branded as unlucky and who experiences hostility and humiliation from society. Similarly, his surname Biswas means trust. While writing the novel, Naipaul seems to have decided to give the novel a happy ending, which is why he created a determined protagonist who, despite his unsuccessful attempts in the early stages, finally gains a piece of space which he can call his own. That may be the main reason why Naipaul, instead of using the first name Mohan, addresses the protagonist Mr. Biswas, adding Mr. to the surname to make his character dignified. According to one critic, Naipaul is able to present a hero who is in all his littleness and still preserve a sense of man's inner dignity. The language of the novel is simple and unaffected by literary fashion. The novel is part of Naipaul's early phase as a novelist when he, through his novel